Welcome back. You're watching The World This Week with my guests, four Paris-based correspondents here. We've got Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet.
Hello.
Craig Peters, Brian Eads from RFI, and Michael Kirtley. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us. We're going to pass now to the standoff in Ukraine, which turned deadly this week. Activists saying several protesters were shot dead, and they manned burning barricades as things turned nastier, and there were talks between the government and the opposition. We've also had the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych saying that he will reshuffle his government and look again at these very controversial anti-protest laws. So we've got pictures there of the scene in central Kiev. The protesters there are saying they won't go home, waiting for the next stage in this impasse. So the question now, how do we see this impasse playing out in Ukraine? Brian Eads, would you like to go forward?
I haven't got a crystal ball, but I did speak yesterday on our morning show to our correspondent in Kiev. And I said, there's talk of a civil war. Is this credible? And he said, you know, at the moment, the only demonstrations, the only riots, the only violence are in the capital, Kiev. Some people are coming from elsewhere in the country to join in, but nothing is happening elsewhere. I see today that in several cities, half a dozen cities around Ukraine, there is trouble. Where this is going, who can say? But it's about more than cozying up to the EU and restoring relations with Russia. It's about endemic corruption, really.
Craig Peters?
The Russian footprint here is large. Looking forward, I'm curious to see what happens down in the Crimean Peninsula, which is part of the Ukraine and which, of course, is home to the Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which are hundreds and hundreds of ships, which the Ukrainians have allowed the Russians to be with under a deal until, I think, 2042. The eastern portion of Ukraine is predominantly Orthodox and Russian. The western portion, just the opposite. Pro-Western, they never liked the Russians. You have to understand that a lot of this split, in fact, if not all of the split that you're seeing here, comes down between pro-Russians and anti-Russians. And how deep is this? You've all seen the video, I'm sure, over the years of Ukrainian parliamentarians fighting in parliament, they're in fisticuffs, doing that. Those fights have always been about lease deals that the Ukrainians have cut with the Russians. And because a lot of Ukrainians don't like that. And every year, Moscow pours hundreds of millions of dollars into the Ukraine to support pro-Russians there. A former mayor of Moscow, Lushkov, a few years ago, he arranged $34 million on his own to go to these people. So the Russians are very, very nervous about this. You heard the knee-jerk reaction, we're going to reshuffle our government, reshuffle our cabinet. I think it's not there yet, but it's getting close to civil war. But looking forward, crystal ball, watch what the Russians do and watch if there are any protests down in the Crimea, which is about 800 kilometers south of Kiev. That, to me, will be an indicator.
That'll be a test point. Okay. So on the brink of civil war, Philippe, what do you make of that? Is it that dramatic?
It looks like that, and it looks like we are fighting the influence of the Russian government everywhere in Syria and maybe in Ukraine, and that's always the same problem. Are we strong enough to push for democracy against the Russian government? And I'm doubting that we will do anything for the Ukrainians in the short term. We should do, obviously, but...
Can you see any movement here, Michael Kirtley? We've had the president saying that he's going to look again at the anti-protest legislation, which the protesters really hate. Do you think they will get any real concessions here?
Well, there was a feeling before these protests that Yanukovych was trying to sort of become a semi-dictator. He had, in fact, I want to read this. There was this text message that was sent out to protesters from who knows whom. Dear subscriber, you are registered as a participant in a mass disturbance. That was sent to the protesters on Tuesday. I don't know if it doesn't say it was a warning, but I think that was kind of the atmosphere of Big Brother overlooking you, and of course the different laws that have taken place recently. I was in Ukraine not too long ago, and going along with what Craig said earlier, there's definitely a sense of corruption everywhere in Ukraine. It reminds me in some sense of an upgraded version of some countries I've been to in Africa. And I think that what you see in the popular movements here, what I notice the most is that the people seem to be very happy to be joining these movements. They see some iniquity that's happened, somebody that's been beaten, somebody that's been killed, and they're happy to run and join the movement. So if that continues, if Yanukovych cannot back down, then certainly there's going to be more protest. And if there's more protest, then you'll see a division between the eastern and western parts of Ukraine. And of course, that could lead to civil war. I'm not ready to say that yet, though.
Okay. And then there's also the question of the credibility of the political opposition leaders, because they've been booed on the barricades in recent days with a lot of protesters saying they don't feel that they're represented by the opposition parties.
I can't really comment on that. All I know is that one of the leaders is a former boxing champion, isn't he?
Yeah, Klitschko, yeah.
But what I can say is that if you look up Yanukovych, you discover that he's not actually Ukrainian. He's a mixture of Russian, Polish and Belarusian. Also his son, whose name is Alexander, has become one of the richest men in the country. 46 of his ministers come from the area where he grew up and built his political following. He was a member of the Communist Party in the Soviet era. So all these things kind of add up and make him look pretty unpleasant to the broad masses, I'd imagine.
And where's Europe on all of this? Once again, you have protesters there saying, we want to be part of Europe, we're European, and you get the impression that a lot of European leaders are going, no, you're not European, no, go away. One really has to, and I haven't seen any tough questioning of European leaders on this issue of whether the Ukraine is spiritually, philosophically, politically, morally, or whatever way you want it to be, European.
We've actually got someone coming through on Twitter talking about this as well. Someone saying that the Ukrainian young people are asking for your help, and that basically Europe isn't delivering. So someone there agreeing with you on that.
What did that tweet say again? Read it again.
Ukraine, I think we can get it up on screen. We'll try and get that up. But Ukrainian young people are asking for your help.
Young people. Wow, there you go. Whoever wrote that tweet has really put their finger on it.
We've got a
There's this young group of folks in the Ukraine whose aspirations are European. But look at all the old people who are running the country. So this is maybe that is a significant tweet, just the way the person who wrote it phrased it.
It's like an Arab Spring, except it's at our door. It's
Ukrainian
in Europe.
Spring.
And if
we
can see it through Twitter and social medias, we can see the very strong pictures about people getting into the street, getting into the street and fighting the police. And we can see that people are getting hurt and killed and everything. And it will be more difficult not to do something than it was in the during the Arab Spring, because we are much closer to the persons who are fighting in the streets. Maybe we have difficulties to control the public opinion on that issue.
Does the tweet say what we should send, what Europe should send? Molotov
It doesn't
cocktails?
go into that. And 140 characters.
Guns.
I think they're a bit, but no. And unfortunately, we also have a technical problem, which means that we can't get it up on screen just yet. But no, they're just saying that they want help in a general way.
Well, young people, you can look anywhere in the world. Young people have aspirations. Old people, not that any of us are old, we have responsibilities. The guys who are running the Ukraine now on both sides, they have bank accounts that they want to keep alive. Russian bank accounts. Big ones. So Europe's question here is who do you side with there? Can you go in, who's the young leader there? That's who needs to be addressed here. I think that's a very powerful tweet given the situation.
Well, send in your tweets. The hashtag is TWTW for the world this week. And we're going to have to leave Ukraine now and turn to the Central African Republic. The new president was sworn in this week, Catherine Samba-Panza, the country's first female leader. She took over as interim president and called for an end to the violence. But the looting and the killing carried on in Bangui even on her inauguration day. Michael Kirtley, I want to ask you, do you think the new president, Catherine Samba-Panza, do you think she can achieve something here?
Well, first of all, it's a wonderful thing that we now have a woman in charge of the Central African Republic, because in addition to the fact that women in that part of the world are less known for corruption, there's also the fact that they're less involved with the military alliances that tend to go hand in hand with the political machines there. But I think that she herself is a very charismatic and also efficient person. But the trouble in that part of the world, especially in the Central African Republic, is there are no real leaders that are saying, let's have some social conscience about our country. And right now, immediately after she was sworn in, there's been a lot of infighting to see who's going to be appointed the minister and all that. And really, there's very little call to think about what the future of the Central African Republic is supposed to be. Right now, what is that country? It's Bangui and the rest. And the rest is in chaos. Bangui is a little bit more stabilized now because of the interventionary force. I think that for her to have a chance, other Central African leaders are going to have to step up and say, let's follow her.
Can she make a difference, Craig Peters?
Well, I read today that the French are committing another 500.
The EU is going to send another 500.
Yeah, we have 1,600 French soldiers there, and I guess 5,000
African
soldiers.
So the total,
European.
The total number of foreign troops now in the Central African Republic is how many?
Have the other African troops.
Yeah,
well.
including what are we looking at?
1,600 French and about 5,000 African troops.
Okay, those figures are exceptionally low for the situation, and they're made lower by a maxim within the military. It's called a tooth-to-tail ratio. A T-to-T ratio is how many people do you need behind the lines to support one troop in the field. And that ratio is accepted to be 3 to 1. So however many troops that you might have there, cut a third out of it, and that's how many folks you have at the front line. And it's woefully minuscule and certainly not enough to do the job that's required.
Well, again, Craig, someone agreeing with you on Twitter. We have a tweet that we can show you now from Chow, Washington. They say, good luck to interim President Catherine Somba-Panza, and she needs substantive United Nations support.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that, Brian Eads?
I think the reaction from the outside world, particularly the UN and France, has been a bit hysterical. They've spoken of genocide. I looked up genocide in the dictionary, and it says the elimination of a people or a country. Clearly this is not happening. They need some help. This woman is a Paris-trained lawyer. Apparently she's a very pleasant woman, very motherly. Whether she can treat with men in the bush with machetes and AK-47s is another matter.
You mean
So
because
yes.
she's a woman?
Sorry?
No,
Because
because
she's
she's a
a woman.
French-trained Paris lawyer.
Because she's French trained. Yeah, we know how to fight in French too, in France too, man.
Because she's a woman
You,
and
you
she's a
don't know how
lawyer.
we train our lawyers.
I
man.
trust her, believe me. I know in Central African
All
Republic,
lawyers are fierce.
I did a film there a couple of years ago and worked a lot with the males that were in power. I'd much rather trust her to do anything worthwhile in that country. However, I think that to discount the fact that there's a potential of genocide is overlooking that genocide just doesn't happen overnight. I mean, in Rwanda,
It's a long process.
In Rwanda, it was like almost a decade before, and people kept warning about it and warning about it. And I know personally Adama Dieng, who's the who's the special advisor to Ban Ki-moon on genocide prevention, and he's not hysterical when he makes statements like that, and he's the one that came out with that statement. It really was in consideration of the fact that it's not happening today, but there's a sectarian violence that ekes into that country because not only of a hatred that might exist, and it might not be in the future between Muslims and Christians, it may be between other sectors of the population, but it happens because of fear. And the fear that takes place on a daily basis in a country where there's total instability like that is overwhelming.
You know, there are 80 ethnic groups and 80 different languages in the country. 50% Christian, 15% Muslim, 35% animist. Which group's going to be eliminated in this genocide?
Genocide is not just about the elimination of an ethnic group. But it's also religious. It's racial. It could be.
Actually, the Muslims are getting wiped off the country. I mean, that's a reality. I mean, there won't be any Muslims anytime soon.
Chinese, as odd as this sounds, this new lady president they have down there, her first call should be to Beijing, because this country needs investment, and the only, as badly as it probably needs troops to come in. And the
It
only
needs a real
country.
African player, and France is not a real African player anymore. We
No.
don't have the means to
I would say it needs a
stand.
real African leader.
Yeah, real African leader. We are
Yeah.
not leaders in Africa anymore. We're trying to do it.
If you want a crystal ball on this, let's see how soon the Chinese get there. Because remember, the Central African Republic has the lowest amount of investment from a foreign direct investment of any country in Africa. And that's significant. And there's a lot of wealth and riches in that country, natural resources, and the only people who can afford to go in there right now are the Chinese.
Why, perhaps you can tell me, why is France interested? I know it's a former colony, there's uranium, there are French residents. Beyond that, why is
we are
France
living
interested?
in the dream that we are able to sustain an African policy, but we don't have, for once, we don't have an African policy. Hollande doesn't have an African policy, and he doesn't want to have one, but he's forced by the circumstances to act, but it's not a strategy. And the second thing is that we are not investing anymore in these countries. We are only there to do the police job, basically, but we are not investing. The Chinese are everywhere investing money. I mean, I know people working with the Chinese to invest money in Africa. Actually, French people are helping the Chinese to find the place to
That's
invest
right.
in Africa.
Exactly right.
So we are helping the Chinese to do the job. I mean, it's not us anymore. I mean, we shouldn't be there for once.
So we shouldn't have intervened for humanitarian reasons?
Not alone. We should have done it with real. I mean, not with 1,600 soldiers. We should have done it with other people. I mean, obviously.
Well,
That's why we are lacking the UN again. We don't have any common force anymore.
And you all seem to agree that the resources anywhere there in Central African Republic are woefully lacking. We're going to move on, and we're going to finish off with a bit of French politics because, well, it's been another diverting week in the corridors of power here in Paris. Never far from embarrassing headlines. President François Hollande is still getting stick about his private life. He still hasn't said whether his partner, Valerie Trieweiler, is going with him to Washington or whether indeed they're still together. And also in the news this week, his old rival, the surest signs yet that Hollande's the former president, of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, could be making a comeback and running again in 2017. The cat let out of the bag, seemingly by the wife of Jacques Chirac, Bernadette Chirac, in a radio interview this week. We can take a listen to that now.
I'm not allowed to say. He wouldn't be happy if I told you.
So are we allowed to take from this that the answer is yes?
Well, yes, clearly.
So Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet,
She's right.
that's
Thanks,
confirmation for you that
Bernadette.
Sarkozy will be running in 2017.
Yeah, obviously, yes. There is no one on the right side. There is no one else than Nicolas Sarkozy to do the job. I mean, François Fillon is deep in his problems. He doesn't know how to handle his image, let alone a campaign. And Jean-François Copé is very much hated by the French public. And there is no one else. I mean, Sarkozy is the champion.
Why is there no one else?
I don't know.
Well, you should. I'm here to tell you.
I don't know. I don't know.
No,
I mean, there should be plenty of people.
And they're not. And that is the interesting thing about France, because France is in dire economic straits. There's no question about it. But to fix this country, you first need to change the conventional political wisdom of this country. Philippe and I were talking about this before the show.
The country.
You're saying that we have a political wisdom. That's a good thing.
Well, you have a conventional political wisdom here. Yeah. And yeah, Sarkozy will probably run, but I would suggest that he's not the solution. I think I think Christine Lagarde.
Yeah, not Christine Lagarde again.
Yeah,
Christine is campaigning
yeah,
for Christine Lagarde every time.
Well, shamelessly, because sometimes
she's a Paris-trained lawyer.
Sometimes,
by the way.
yes, a good one. Who the French Imperium did not want to deal with because she didn't go to the right schools or know the right people, but is a great success and a very smart woman. But sometimes, Philippe, the Americans need to apply a little French wisdom to how things work in America. And sometimes the French need to apply a little American wisdom. And I think this is the opportunity for that. If this was the United States, which we all know it isn't and never will be, there would be a group here right now who would isolate who would be a strong candidate to take on Hollande within his own party or from the right. And if you look at, bundle a campaign together And if you look at this right now, at this point in time, the only viable candidate with the leadership qualities to run this country is Christine Lagarde. And right now, the conventional wisdom here, the way the parties are structured, et cetera, the media, precludes that from happening. And I think that's a damn shame for this country.
She has to fight for it.
She hasn't hinted yet or declared that she would run in 2017.
She has to fight for it. I mean, we are voting for the winner.
But I'm curious if anyone over at La Maison Sans Fenêtre has called her up and said, hey, do you want to run? I don't think so, because
nobody will call her. She has to come and fight.
But I think
that's
we're talking about Sarkozy, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely. Let's bring it back to Sarkozy.
And I think that the real question is, 3 years out, can we even predict how an election would go? I mean, there's so many things that could happen. But moreover, I looked this up before coming on the show. According to what I was reading, there's never been a president in France that's been reelected to office after going out of office.
Well, this brings me into a very pertinent comment we've had along those lines on Twitter. We have SemK5 saying the beauty is that Sarkozy can decide to run, but only the French can decide to take him as president again. I mean, looking into our crystal balls around the table, obviously 3 years is a long time. Would the French accept to re-elect Nicolas Sarkozy?
Obviously, yes. Because he is the only one on the right. I mean, there is no choice. There is no alternative.
Does that mean there won't be an alternative?
I mean, François Hollande is very, very low in the polls. I mean, it should take a miracle for him
George
to be
Bush was
re-elected.
very low in the polls before 9/11.
That's an interesting comparison I wouldn't make.
You know, but what I mean,
find us another alternative, Brian. What's another?
Brian
We need another alternative.
I've seen Sarkozy quoted through an unnamed friend as saying, "I cannot not run. It is my destiny."
He wants to do it
is
because
written.
it has never been done, as you
It
said.
was written, yeah. But, okay.
I'm not pro-Sarkozy. I mean, that's not the point.
But you're saying there's no one else.
I mean, there is no one else.
There's no other
and
but you're also saying that you think that he would defeat Hollande.
in the current state of affairs, he would defeat him. Obviously, yes.
But
there have been polls.
Hollande doesn't know how to campaign. I mean.
Brian needs
are there not still skeletons in the closets? I know some court cases against him have
but the
gone
French
nowhere.
are not so much concerned by the skeletons.
They all and every politician has a skeleton.
Jacques Chirac was elected with the worst skeletons in his
They don't all have a
I'm
motorcycle.
not saying it's a good thing.
That's right. Actually, it's a motor scooter. We're still wondering if the guy knows how to shift on
This
track.
brings us very neatly onto François Hollande, because the headlines haven't stopped. Closer magazine has been bringing its print run forward to bring yet more revelations along. We've seen opinion polls as well saying that his popularity has actually plummeted. There had been speculation saying it might give him a boost, but apparently no French voters are getting fed up with these stories. I mean, do you think this is the end for him politically, or can he come back from these rumours?
He's got 3 years to go, 3.5 years to go, is it?
It's a long time.
It's a long time. What I heard a phrase that I hadn't heard before this week, pour vivre heureux, vivant caché, which apparently translates as to live happily, live hidden. He's chosen to be in the spotlight.
Or he was thrust into the spotlight.
Well, he chose. He didn't have to say yes. And he's paying the consequences. The idea that France respects privacy more, for example, than England is a nonsense. The weekly magazines like Closer, if we include Paris Match, sell 3.3 million copies a week. So people are interested.
And I can definitely say that a lot of French people, this is very much the topic
Everyone
that's
is
been on their
talking
lips.
about it.
Everyone's talking about it
Right,
in French,
but
so I
you
agree
see,
with you.
the real question that serious French voters have to ask is, do you actually believe that François Hollande and or Nicolas Sarkozy represents the best interests of France? And I'm hard-pressed to find anyone in the street who can answer yes to that question, which tells me there has to be another candidate out there, and there's 3 years to find that candidate.
3 years is a long time.
It
but
is.
It's not a long time to launch a new figure in politics. You have to be there you have to get known. You have to have a whole apparatus around you, a machine to do it, a support.
Yeah.
You have to have thousands of euros to
Well,
campaign.
maybe someone will bundle this together over the next 3 years.
I don't believe in that. And
Well, I think France needs it. France needs to grow out of this
but
horrid tradition.
But is it not
it's
true,
no country for
Craig?
younger men here in politics. It's no country for younger men in politics in
I'm
France.
afraid
Is
we're
it
going to
not
have...
true, Craig, that countries get the
briefly.
politicians they deserve?
Absolutely, and they deserve what they get.
Well, on that very philosophical note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed to all my guests.
Send us Obama. He's retiring.
He's all yours.
We have to leave it there,
Obama.
gentlemen. Thank you so much. You have been watching The World this week. Thanks to my guests, Michael Kirtley, the producer of the World Memory film. Also, we've got Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet. Thank you very much for being with us, columnist for the Nouvel Obs. Craig Capitas, the correspondent at large for Quartz and the Atlantic Group, and Brian Eads from the English service of RFI, Radio France Internationale. Thank you all very much for being with us. Thanks at home for watching. Do stay tuned to France 24.